We don't talk about this enough, but male loneliness is quietly costing us more than we realize, not just emotionally and physically, but also in our society. And the worst part, most men don't even see it coming. I've spent the last few years researching and working with people on the hidden structure of our inner lives, what shapes our habits, what shapes our resilience and our capacity for connection. And this is one of the biggest blind spots I see, especially in men. So in this video, I want to unpack why male friendships fade, what's the impact for men and society as a whole, and how to build something real again, before life makes the choice for you. Let me ask you something that most men never say out loud. When was the last time you felt genuinely connected to another man, without needing an excuse for it? I have worked with enough people to know this isn't rare. We go to work, go home, keep up with responsibilities, but somewhere along the line, the deeper friendships, the ones that aren't transactional or based on shared tasks, just fade out. And no one tells us how much that costs us. There's some fascinating research by Robin Dunbar. Yeah, Robin Dunbar is a guy behind the idea that our brains can only handle about 150 relationships. He found that men actually need regular time with friends, not once in a while but consistently, to stay emotionally healthy. And yet, more and more men are going without any close friendships at all. And this is not just sad, it's dangerous, because what looks like a full life on the outside can quietly start feeling hollow when there's no one left to really talk to. Not about work, not about kids, but about you. This video isn't about blaming men. It's about naming something most of us were not taught to value. And if you have been feeling that connection has gotten harder, or you're not sure how to even start rebuilding it, you are not alone, my friend. And it's not too late. So today I want to talk about what's really going on here, what keeps men from building the kind of friendships they actually need, and how we can start shifting that. Let's be honest here, most men aren't great at keeping their friendships alive. And I'm not saying that to criticize, because first of all, I'm one of them. And I've seen the impact it has on people I work with, and I felt it on my own life too. I say what I say with empathy. You see, when male friendships are nurtured, they're often some of the most grounding, least complicated and most loyal friendships we have. But unlike romantic partnerships or family roles, there's no social structure pushing us to maintain them. So if we don't choose to make space for those connections, life will happily fill that space with deadlines, with family duties, and with other obligations. 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the line, you realize you haven't had a real conversation with someone who truly gets you. There are many parts of this equation, but one part of the challenge is this. A lot of men haven't been taught to see emotional connection as something viable in and of itself. Let's take, for example, women, right? And contrast what we do in comparison to what they do. So women are generally socialized to recognize that talking, sharing, and belonging is the point. But for men, on the other hand, it often feels that we need a practical excuse for closeness. Like, for example, gather together to watch the football match, or work on a car, or train in the gym. We meet up through doing something, not to connect. And if that activity stops or disappears for whatever reason, then the friendship often does too. That doesn't make us shallow. It just means that the rules of engagement are different, and sometimes a little restricting, a little limiting. So let's try to reframe what I said into this question. What if the activity was just the doorway, and what we really want and what we really look for is inside that room? Because at the end of the day, the need for connection isn't a female or a male trait. It's a human one. Most men don't realize this, but the friendships we treat as optional, they're actually critical, not just for happiness, but for actual physical health. There's so much research now that shows that losing deep connection doesn't just make you feel isolated. It affects your brain, your heart, and even your lifespan. So if you've been quietly powering through thinking, I'm fine, everything is fine, what we're saying here might make you see that in a very different light. But let's zoom out for a moment and talk about this. And that's an evolutionary reason of why us men, we feel closer after doing something together rather than just sitting down and talking about our feelings. Because this thing that we do isn't emotional avoidance, it's ancestral wiring. Hear me out and see how it plays out. You see, in our tribal communities, connection wasn't built through dialogue. It wasn't people just sitting around and talking about their feelings and expressing their emotions. It was about building connection through collaboration, through hunting, through gathering, through building shelter, through defending our territory. Male coalitions dependent on coordinated action. You didn't need to explain your emotions. You proved your loyalty by showing up, moving in sync, and share the burden of the group. This is what evolutionary psychologists call coalitional bonding, which is a dynamic way where trust is formed through cooperation in pursuit of a common goal. And it still plays out today, whether it's a football match or helping a friend move house. The act of doing something together activates a form of connection that's ancient and deeply meaningful. And there's more to that because there's also a neuroscience angle here. You see, research into mirror neurons, which is those brain cells that fire when we observe others and when we act, suggests that shared physical activity enhances empathy and coordination. That's why two guys lifting weights together in the gym can feel understood without even saying anything. Their brains are literally syncing through motion and mimicry. And then there's this thing which is called social baseline theory, which says that the human brain is wired to expect support from others. We're not built to face stress or uncertainty alone. When someone shares an experience with us, especially one that requires some effort or there's some challenge in there, then our brain perceives it as safer and more manageable, even without deep emotional exchange. The body, what it does is that it registers that we are not alone, and that happens at a very physical level. And this is why the best conversations often happen while walking, for example, while driving or working with your hands. The movement that our body does relaxes the nervous system, and the eyes don't need to lock. The silence is less threatening that way. And it's not less emotional, it's just less performative. And that's something we need to reframe. For many men, emotional safety doesn't come through intensity. The intensity, for example, that you observe in some women's groups when they start sharing their emotions. For us, emotional safety comes through rhythm, through repetition, and through the quiet companionship of just being side by side. So instead of trying to force depth through words, which for most men it might feel unnatural, maybe the real question is this: what kind of shared experience will allow connection to unfold naturally? And here's a catch: when connection depends on an activity, you're also at the mercy of that activity happening. Your schedules need to align. So one of the members of the group needs to arrange for the football court, or you need to remember to book the jiu-jitsu class. And if any of those logistics fall through, then so does the hangout. You see, it's not that men don't want to spend time together, it's that the structure they rely on is really, really fragile. Now compare that context of having a shared activity, of going somewhere with your friends to meet, hang out and do something, to a friend who just calls you and says, hey, do you have time to chat for a bit? No plans, no pretext. Just the relationship itself being enough of a reason. That's a muscle a lot of us haven't learned to flex. But here's the interesting part. When we do show up to that football game, to that night out together, to that long bike ride, what we're often chasing without even realizing it isn't the football match or how many miles we're going to do during the bike ride. It's that warm sense of being seen, of being heard, and of being understood. It's the conversation that happens halfway through, the laughter that makes you forget the stress of the week. It's the joke that someone will say that will completely make you forget all of your issues. Connection isn't some soft, sentimental luxury. It's core to what makes us human. And yeah, okay, it's very different from me and you and, the other guy of how much of it we need. But none of us can thrive without it. And the sooner we get honest about that, the sooner we can stop outsourcing it to, whether or not the right plans are going to come together. And the sooner we can start making space more deliberately. And now we need to address something that we don't often hear, and that's the very idea of not needing anyone. That badge of independence a lot of us like to wear, which is also what quietly pushes people away. Think about it like this. The less you let yourself need from others, the less space there is for others to show up in your life. And this is purely mathematical. If you convince yourself that you're fine on your own without needing anyone, then you stop giving people a reason or even a doorway to step in. And this belief isn't random. Our whole culture loves the image of the stoic, self-sufficient man, the guy who handles everything by himself. He doesn't ask for help, he doesn't crack under pressure. The image that I'm describing now is everywhere and has been everywhere, from action movies to how boys are praised for, being strong and being little men. But let's not confuse coping with thriving. Yes, you can push through life without needing anyone, without leaning on anyone emotionally. You can. I know you're strong enough. But you will feel the cost at some day. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But in those quiet moments when it matters the most. And no, this doesn't mean going to the other extreme. We don't have to start oversharing on group chats or turning every catch-up into therapy session. That's not the point here. There's enough space between I need no one and I need constant self-gratification and validation. Most men probably feel most comfortable somewhere in the middle. And the key is being honest enough to find your version of that middle. Because here's the truth. If your whole life you act as if you need nothing from no one, over time, that's exactly what life will give you. That's exactly what you'll be left with. No one. And I sometimes think about it in a very cost-benefit analysis way that, I think most men, we think that way unconsciously. And this is this. When we consider catching up with a friend, where does that sit on our priority list? Well, then the question is, how do we define our priority list? But it's rarely top 5, maybe not even top 10. Because spending time with a friend doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't help with getting the kids to school. It doesn't impress the boss. It doesn't improve your abs or, it doesn't tick off any boxes in your productivity app. It's not efficient. It's not monetizable. It just makes you feel good. And us men, we like efficiency more than anything else. And we will prioritize that than something that makes us just feel good. So in a world where we constantly try to optimize, to do what moves the needle, something that just makes us feel connected, it gets really deprioritized. So when your friend keeps rescheduling or disappears into, parenting work vortex, it's not necessarily because he doesn't care. It's because the things that make him valuable to others, or the things that he thinks makes him valuable to others, his job, his parenting, his output, are as more justifiable uses of his time. And here's the kicker here. Society applauds that. Why? Because we've seen throughout our culture that men are praised when we sacrifice our own well-being for the benefit of others. When we become providers, when we become producers, when we become problem solvers. And here's the truth. Friendship doesn't benefit anyone except the man himself. And in a world that doesn't encourage men to value their own joy, connection starts to feel, like a luxury instead of a lifeline. So if you're a man who said, hey babe, I'm going out to meet with the guys, and you got a raised eyebrow in return, you know exactly the feeling I'm talking about. It's not direct, it's subtle. It's more like, again, didn't you see them last week or last month? I don't know. And when we have to face these things, when you get those signals, the message underneath that signal is that you shouldn't be doing this and you should do something more useful with your time. And what's fascinating is that this pressure doesn't come from, some bad intention or some, villain on the outside. It comes from the people who are closest to us, partners, family, and most of the times, it's not about our partners, it's not about our family, it's about that inner voice in our head. you're not enough, you're not productive enough, you're not good enough, you haven't done much, there's so many things you can do. Why would you go out? So it's not necessarily ill-intended, but it does reinforce a very clear message that time spent on friendship isn't time well spent unless it somehow benefits others, unless you are productive with something while you're hanging out. That's how many men end up building their entire identity around being productive. They become high functioning, they become efficient, they become endlessly responsible. They generate value day after day after day for the boss, for the kids, for the partner. And if they're not producing, they feel guilty. We feel weak. We feel that we're not man enough. But over time, this mindset can become so internalized that even rest, even taking holidays, even take some time off, it feels wrong. Connection feels indulgent. And eventually, friendship becomes something you have to justify to yourself first and foremost. And this is where the danger lies, is that you start to measure yourself and your worth by your output. Once you do that, everything else, joy, friendship, emotional connection, they start to look like a distraction. And I know so many men, so many smart men, so many caring men, so many responsible men, not only as friends, but the people I work with, whose lives have been reduced to two things, office and home. They give their energy to their job all day long, and whatever is left goes to their partner and to their kids in the evening. And that's the routine, day in, day out. And let me pause here and say that it's not that you need to stop doing that, right? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that when you do that, life might feel like it's well lived on the surface. Work and family are really deeply meaningful. But there's a difference between meaning and sustainability. What is meaningful and what can be sustainable in the long run without creating any inner fractures. Because when a man begins to narrow down his whole world into two stops, his relationship and his job, right? The employer and the partner, then he becomes incredibly vulnerable, whether he realizes it or not. And why is that? Because he starts to outsource all his emotional needs to a very limited circle. And if one of those pillars cracks, the whole structure starts to wobble. This is why we see such a stark difference in how men and women cope with major life changes, for example. Like, take divorce, for example. The numbers are staggering. Men are way more likely to spiral after a breakup, even to the point of taking their own lives. And that's 5 to 10 times more than women. It's not negligible. Why? Because often the social world that we had no longer exists. If one of those pillars breaks apart. Let's take, for example, divorce. We outsource the nurturing of the relationship to our wife most of the times. She handles the social calendar. Our wife's friends become our friends. She's the one who keeps the relationships alive. And without realizing it, we stop cultivating our own friendships. Years go by, we haven't formed a new connection since university, and suddenly, when the marriage ends, there's no one left to lean on. And this isn't about blaming anyone again. We're not blaming or shaming anyone here. It's about noticing a pattern that's silently eroding our emotional support system. And the cost of ignoring that can be devastating. And we don't talk about this enough, but it needs to be said clearly. When men go through life without deep friendships, it's not just sad, it's dangerous. Because loneliness, especially for men, isn't just an emotional ache, it's a health risk, one that's been compared to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's how strongly social connection impacts your nervous system, your immune system, your whole functions, even your heart. The US Surgeon General recently reported that loneliness increases the risk of stroke and heart disease by nearly 30%. It raises the chance of developing dementia by 50%. And for men in particular, the consequences can be even more severe. Rates of depression and suicide rise dramatically for men as they age, especially after major life changes like a divorce or retirement, when friendships often fall away and aren't replaced. And here's a painful irony. This isn't because men don't want deep connections. It's because we are taught, often subtly and sometimes violently, that needing emotional intimacy makes us weak. We are taught to man up, to keep it together, to solve problems on our own. And so many boys who grew up loving and leaning on their friends start to shut that part of themselves down when adolescence kicks in. They trade closeness for coolness. Vulnerability becomes something to avoid. Over time, this rewires how men relate to each other. We stop calling, we stop texting, we stop sharing. Friendships become thinner. They're based on conveniences, on hobbies, on surface level banter. And if life shifts, if someone moves away, has kids or changes jobs or even changes a country, when I moved from Greece to London, for example, I was grieving for many years, and I still do, the friendships that I lost. So if someone has major life changes, those fragile ties often snap. This isn't just a loss of companionship, it's a loss of safety, of emotional grounding, of the ability to say, look man, I'm not okay, let's go for a walk, let's talk, let's go out, and not feel ashamed. There's a psychologist, her name is Niobe Way, and she calls this the crisis of connection, which is a cultural epidemic where boys are socialized out of their own emotional needs. And it doesn't just affect individuals, it becomes a public health issue. A society full of isolated men is a society more vulnerable to despair, addiction, and quiet suffering. That's why it's so important to push back, not with blame, not with shame, but with awareness and with compassion. Because friendship isn't a luxury, it's oxygen. And no one should have to hold their breath just to appear strong. Here's my message for today. You are more than your output. You're more than what you earn. You are more than the problems you solve. You are more than what you provide. And when we start defining our worth by how useful we are to others, we slowly disconnect from what actually gives us a sense of meaning. From the relationships, the rituals, the small moments that we share, the small moments of joy that reminds us that we're alive. Taking that part of yours back doesn't mean turning your back on your work or your family. It means that you're building something way more resilient and way more sustainable, which is a more humane life. One where connection isn't just tolerated, but protected. Because when things get hard, and life will get hard, it's not about your job title. It's not about how much you produced that will catch you if you're falling. It's your people. And if you don't have those people yet, it's not too late to start rebuilding. Slowly, imperfectly, but intentionally. You can sign up for my free newsletter at designthyself.com. I share tools and insights on human behavior, growth, and the psychology of everyday life. And if you're looking for something more personalized, I'm offering one-on-one sessions too. You'll find all the details in the link in the description below. If any of what we discussed today landed with you, then I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who might be struggling quietly with what we're discussing, then send him the link of that episode. It might be the nudge he didn't know he needed. Thank you for making it so far, and more importantly, thank you for spending time for yourself. And never stop asking, what is the thing within me that makes me do the things I do? I'm Dimitris, and I'll see you the next one.